तनौ भुनक्तु सह वीर्यङ्करभावहै तेजस्विनावधीतमस्तु मा विद्विषावहै। ॐ शान्ति शान्ति शान्ति। We may not find any direct utility with these theories, with these ideas. However, it is important for you to know that. For those who are really interested in studying philosophy, Vedanta, you have to know these concepts. You got to have a solid grounding on four main ideas. One is this states of consciousness. One. Second one is causation, karma, law of karma. The third one is the theory of perception. The fourth one is illusions. The four main ideas are important for those who say that I have understood philosophy. Means you must have a solid understanding on these four ideas. The depth that you have on these four defines your knowledge, defines your understanding in that field. So therefore, it is very important for those who are really keen in studying Vedanta, know about spiritual. Person says, I want to have the knowledge of spirituality. It is not enough that you know, sattva, rajas, tamas. It is not enough that you know, karma yoga, bhakti yoga, jnana yoga, hatha yoga, raja yoga, all this, various yogas. And what is the meaning of, breaking a coconut? Why Ganesha is having this elephant head. That's all okay to know. But that understanding doesn't define your subject knowledge. The subject knowledge of yours comes only from these four ideas. To the extent you have a grip on these four ideas defines your knowledge. So keep going back to these ideas as many times as possible. Keep revising it again and again and again. But the problem is there is no direct value in studying any one of this. At least this law of karma will have some entertainment value. Right? Why this is happening to me? Now, that's not a big entertainment because there's only one word answer for that. Karma, problem solved. Why this is your own thoughts, full stop. Which thought, what thought, and all that is where the whole thing goes. Even there, it's not really completion there. It is too superficial. So you have to go back to those ideas again and again. So that's why he says, even though you may not see any practical value of this, however, what you need to understand is all that what we are calling as practical is made practical because of the solidarity of the theory behind it. The theorem, the concept. The solid concept is there behind it. Because of that alone, we are able to make something workable, practical. So those who say that I am going to work only on that is like difference between a person who has studied mechanical engineering and a person who has been working in a mechanic shop. Right? Most of us will say what? Most of our problem can be solved by the person who is working in the mechanic shop, sir. Enough for us. What he can do, the tinkering he can do this, he can do that. But you see a distinct difference. When you have a sophisticated car, you give that car to a roadside mechanic. Vis-a-vis, you give the car to the authorized dealer. There is a difference, isn't it? The way they finish the job. There's a distinct difference, you can see that. How much you will pay to this person, how much is paid to that person. Why? Because he is not only having practical knowledge, he is also having theoretical understanding. That is the difference between a chemist and a doctor. A chemist also knows all the chemical combinations of this. You tell him the tablets, he will tell you for what you are taking it. And he will give alternatives also for that. But still, how much you pay to him and how much you pay to a doctor. Consultation fee, he says, yeah, you don't have anything, continue the same medicine. To say that you have to give him 2,500 rupees. Right? And we are willing to pay. Why? Because he has a deeper understanding of the anatomy. Theoretically, he knows more. Remember, theoretical knowledge is so important. So don't dismiss it. Because today we find that everywhere people say, we want practical, we want to have practical thing. We are becoming too involved with that. With that mindset, don't read now. So that's why he is giving the point here. And he is going to continue here. Right. Now only we are going to start the study of the theory of perception. So far, as our 2 classes are over, only now we are going to start now. Only now he is starting. Right. So read this. Yes. Continue.
Page 294, paragraph 3. Before launching into the study of the theory of perception, the 2 terms commonly used, subject and object, need to be defined. In the context, the word subject means the perceiver, knower, experiencer, while object means that which is perceived, known, experienced. Take the example of perceiving a landscape. You are the perceiver and the landscape, the perceived. You are the knower, the experiencer, and the landscape, the known or experienced. You are the subject, the landscape, the object. Here again, the concept of the subject varies. Western philosophers take the mind as the subject. Consider the mind to be the perceiver, knower, experiencer, whereas Vedanta states the mind itself to be an object, known, experienced. You can conceive your mind, know it, experience it. It fits into the definition of an object, not subject. Anything perceived or conceived, known or experienced, ceases to be the subject in the true sense. Vedanta declares the inner self, Atman, to be the subject, to be the real perceiver, knower, experiencer. Hence, from the absolute point of view, the Atman is the subject and the mind the object. While in the relative sense, from a practical angle, the mind becomes the subject and the rest of the world the object. However, in the theories of perception discussed below, the mind is taken as the subject, perceiver, knower, experiencer, and what is perceived, known, experienced by the mind as the object.
Now he is going into the topic. Before launching into the topic, first you got to define the terms. And you will find two terms will be used continuously in this entire discussion of perception. That is subject and object. So he says subject means the perceiver, the knower, experiencer. Then what is object? Object is the perceived, known, experienced. That is the object. The perceiver is different from the perceived. This is the first principle we saw. The perceiver is different, the subject is different, the object is different. Since they are two different things, their properties, their function, their nature also has to be different. Both of them cannot be having the same parameters, features. The features of subject is different, the features of object has to be different. So first thing he says, what is a subject? What is an object? The first level analysis says, the object is the sense objects, the world. The subject is the organs of perception, is the subject. Then, as we saw in the last class, we see even the organs of perception also being perceived, isn't it? I am able to register my eye, isn't it? I am able to say my eye has different properties. Blind, or my eyesight is dull, or my eyesight is sharp. I have a sharp eyes, dull, say. The moment I am able to see the nature of my eyes, then immediately the eyes is perceived by something else. So eye is seeing the forms, the color and forms. So the entire analysis I am taking only eye. Then you can extend it to other senses also, right? Ears you can add, nose, all that you can add. Okay. Now when I see, I am able to see that object. So that object, the color and form what I am seeing in the world becomes the perceived. The eye is a perceiver. First level. Very common sense this is. You don't need any great application thinking and all that. But then what happens we say is, my eye itself is perceived, experienced, known, isn't it? I am able to know how my eye is, isn't it? So which means there is immediately the eye becomes the known, which means it becomes the object. If eye becomes the object, then what is the subject? Say mind is the subject. Now here when we say mind, we are including intellect also. Okay, you don't have to distinguish here. Is it mind or intellect, sir, and all that? All put together. This is what we are, thoughts. Essentially, we are referring to thought. So, instead of using the word thought, initially we use the word mind. But later on, when we go and study the theory of perception, Vedantic theory of perception, there we will use the word thought. Up to that time, we will be using the word mind only. But Every time you use the word mind, you understand we are referring to a thought. So the mind is the knower, then the I becomes the known. So mind becomes the perceiver, the eyes, the eyes, EYE, becomes the perceived. Right? Up to this point, even the Western thinkers also come to this. Only after this, Vedanta alone goes a step further. Up to that is clear. So they say, I is only intermediary. It is not. So essentially, as far as the idealism and realism analysis is concerned, there they will refer only, subject means only the mind, object means the sense objects. Full stop, nothing else. They skip the sense organs. But Vedanta doesn't do that. Vedanta goes one step and says it dissects that also and says no. First, the I is also participating in that. So therefore, we keep the eyes also into account. Then it goes one step further and says, I am able to experience my mind also. Right? I am able to experience it, no? I am able to know what is the state of my mind. My mind is disturbed. I am able to recognize that. I am excited. I am able to recognize that. I am sad. I am able to recognize I am happy. All that I am able to recognize, which means there is something in me which is knowing the mind. And as a rule, what is it, sir? The perceiver has to be different from the perceived. They cannot be the same. This is why the 4 points are important. See, immediately we will ask this question, sir, why not the mind know itself? Right? Mind can know itself, no? Not possible, we say. This is where the difference comes. Because as far as this idealism and realism are concerned, all the thinkers who discuss idealism, realism, they take data only from the waking state. They completely ignore the data taken from the dream and deep sleep. So therefore, when you take only data from the waking world, you are not able to differentiate. Limited information you will have. Problem number 1. Problem number 2 is you will be flouting the fundamental principle with which we started. What is it? The perceiver has to be different from the perceived. The knower has to be different from the known. So the mind becomes the known, then something else in me becomes the knower. Right? That something else which is knowing the mind is what is referred in Vedanta as the self, Atman, or the pure consciousness. So, what is the condition now? The sense objects or the perceived, the sense organs become the perceiver. Then the sense organs becomes the perceived. mind becomes the perceiver. Then we go one step, say, mind becomes the perceived, the pure consciousness becomes the perceiver. Right? You're all with me. Just see the slide. Subject and object. What is the difference here? First thing, the sense objects are the subject. The jnanendriyas becomes the object. The sense objects were the object. Then the organs of perception, senses or jnanendriyas, becomes the subject. Then the sense organs becomes the thing, which means in the second one, sense organs plus sense objects. What you need to understand is it is plus. Mind becomes the subject. Then what is the meaning of that? That is, the mind knows the sense organs plus sense objects. Then mind itself becomes the object, which means plus mind, which means the sense objects plus sense organs plus mind becomes the perceived. And what becomes a perceiver now? The pure consciousness becomes the perceiver now, which is what is referred as Atman, the self, subject. Okay. So now we are having two broad category of subject. Subjects can be two. One, relative subject. Another one is absolute subject. Right? Relative subject, absolute subject. What is the relative subject and what is the absolute subject? That we can understand very easily now. Relative subject is the mind, because mind becomes very, very preliminary stage is the senses, eyes. There also we found in our understanding, it goes and sets in the sense centers, which is part of the mind. Therefore, they can tick off the sense organs straight away. So the sense organs were removed from the status of the subject. Also, it is removed from the status of object. If you tick off those two things, then what you will have? Sense objects, mind. The subject is the mind, object is the sense objects. The perceiver is the mind, perceived is sense objects. Then, how the mind is perceiving the sense objects? Through the sense organs. So, sense organs only a medium for the mind, vehicle for the mind to reach to the world, or the door through which the sense objects enter into the mind. Therefore, we don't give much importance to it, we are taking it out of equation. Then what we will have? You will have two things now. Relatively speaking, the subject is the mind, sense objects is the object. Then the mind itself becomes known. Therefore, what happens? The mind also becomes this side, becomes the object, and what becomes the subject then? The pure consciousness becomes the subject. This is subject-object analysis. Right? And what is the nature of that perceiver and perceived? You got to repeat that. This is what I meant by saying you have to keep doing it again and again. Now what we have to study here is, what we have to understand is two things. Two ways we have to bracket it. Nature of the perceiver, nature of the perceived. One. Second one we study is, the perceiver is where we pay more concentration and analyze in more detail. And we don't analyze much with reference to the perceived. Why? There are two things: subject-object, perceiver, perceived. We have stated what is perceived, what is perceiver, what is subject, what is object. We have stated that. Having stated that, what are we supposed to do? Having studied this, he has explained it to us. Now what are we supposed to do? Where we are going to focus now? That's where the fourth point we saw in the principles. I am the perceiver. I am not the perceived. Therefore, more analysis we do with reference to what is the nature of the perceiver. And in that study of the perceiver's nature, we found two types of perceivers there. There are two guys are claiming, I am the perceiver, I am the perceiver. Right? That's why this tick off is important. So step 1, we have that 4. Subject, object. Subject is the perceiver, object is perceived. Right? One thing we have is, we remove the senses. So who are the fellows there? There are only 3 parties are standing now. From 4 we have reduced to 3. Sense objects, which means the world. 1. 2. Mind. 3. Pure consciousness. 3 fellows are there. Now in this 3, the sense objects will be eternally standing in the position of what? Eternally it will be standing in the position of an object. It is absolute object. Now the problem is only between these 2 fellows. So the sense object's role is fixed. Perennially his role is what? Object. What is he? Always he is going to be the eternal perceived. Right? This is what we study in this introductory texts in Vedanta. This study, what the analysis, what we are doing is done in the introductory texts, Prakarana. Don't ask me where, what. If you go there, you will not understand anything. See, I'm just giving you here. In the text, Drik Drishya Viveka, this is one text. There are 2 texts they do this. Preliminary analysis. And the same is analyzed in the Upanishads. The same is analyzed in Brahma Sutra also. It's not that it is done only in introductory text, please. Introductory texts we study. Also we have that concept explained in the Upanishads. It has also Sutra. Brahma Sutras also has. Right. But when you go to this Upanishads and Brahma Sutra, it is presented in such a cryptic way. Bhashyakara gives a little elaboration, and then further Tika gives a little more elaboration. The little more elaboration is of 1000 verses. Little elaboration. Forget it. By the time you read all that and then come to some conclusion, you have gone mad completely. Thank God we have some masters who are able to go through those things and give us in a manner which is digestible for us. Right? So first thing, see, is the form, the color and form, the sense objects. So sense objects' role is fixed. What is their role? They are eternally going to be standing as a perceived. Okay. Same way, the pure consciousness also will be standing only as, eternally this will be standing as the perceiver. The pure consciousness can never become perceived. How and all we will see. Right? Those two roles are fixed. One fellow who is completely confused is this guy, in between, mind. Because from one angle, he is the perceiver. Another angle, he is perceived. He is the knower, also known. The difference between Vedanta and idealism, realism is this. In idealism, they take the mind itself to be the absolute perceiver. They assign a role of perceiver alone to the mind. Vedanta comes and says, no, you cannot give that. You have to include this mind is having a dual role. Exactly like the organs of perception. Organs of perception also, that is why first we need to include organs of perception, delete organs of perception, and include organs of perception. This is why, he has warned us earlier. All this theoretical study people will not do. You say, why include him? Why remove him? Why again include him? Exactly like organs of perception, with reference to the senses, sense objects, organs of perception is a perceiver. But with reference to mind, what is organs of perception? Becomes perceived. So, your Jnanendriyas, organs of perception, has a dual role. Same way, the mind also has dual role. First acknowledge it. First recognize it. To recognize that only, we bring in this reasons and all that. Right. So here we ask this one. What is the fundamental nature of the perceiver and the perceived? Right. Based on which we can classify, we can say, yeah, correct, sir, we have done this the distinction of what is the nature of the perceiver, what is the nature of the perceived, and all that we can see. You see. So next is thing what we are doing is we are seeing the distinction of the subject and object, perceiver and perceived. What are the features of it? We are studying the same thing from a different way. That's it. The first one is the perceiver is independent. The perceived is dependent. Number one. Number two, this we have seen earlier. The perceiver is one, the perceived is many. Two. The third one is the most important one. The third and fourth point is the important, which is a unique one. Now we are add-on feature now. That is, the perceiver has to be a sentient entity and the perceived has to be insentient. Right? Because the definition of the knower is what? A knower must be endowed with the capacity to know. Only then he can be called as a knower. Isn't it? So, if there are only objects in the world, will such world exist or not? There is no beings, no animals, no plants, no nothing, only objects. Will such world exist or not? You say, it cannot exist. Why? To account for an existence of such a world, someone should see, no? Isn't it? Someone has to see such a world and come out and report to us. Yes, there is a world like that. Nobody is there. No living thing is there. Then there has to be one conscious being to register it. So therefore, we see a perceiver must be having that liveliness, sentiency. With reference to the perceived, the perceiver has to have a long-lasting one. The perceived will come and go. The perceiver will be relatively long-lasting. That has to be. The movie will move fast, but the eye that is seeing will exist, no? This two were the main points to remember. Just to go lead into it, I have given those 2 points: independent and dependent, one and many. These points we have seen earlier. Right? This is the distinction between the nature of the perceiver and the nature of the perceived. Now we see the next one. What we have to see is what is the distinction between the relative perceiver and absolute perceiver. First we said what is perceiver, what is perceived. Then we have seen what is the nature of features of the perceiver and the features of the perceived. Now we are going to the discussion of distinction in the perceiver itself. What is the distinction we have here? First we are seeing what is relative perceiver. Relative perceiver is who senses and mind. essentially mind. Absolute perceiver, sapekshika and nirapekshika is how it is stated. Oh, who's absolute one? The sakshi, the pure consciousness, is the absolute perceiver. Ultimate. What is this and what is that? Why we are not putting mind in the category of absolute perceiver? Because we take the deep sleep also into account. In the data, we include deep sleep. We are not taking only waking state. We are including the deep sleep state also. Deep sleep means dreamless sleep. So you go through the 3 states of consciousness. Remember, all these ideas come together. These 3 were like, a triangle. The states of consciousness, theory of perception, illusion. All 3. You get that understanding. With all 3, you come to a conclusion and establish the reality. Establish the truth. The reality of Brahman, Atman or self or pure consciousness. So first, we say, in the deep sleep state, there is no mind. Correct? There is no mind. If you say absolute, if you give the status of absolute perceiver to mind, then who is registering the deep sleep? Because mind is absent there. Because mind cannot say, I am in deep sleep, when you are in deep sleep. Mind is absent. In deep sleep, mind is gone. Now who is? Who's registering that? I had a fantastic sleep, sir. Nice sleep I had. Who's registering that? That is where we come to this conclusion. Say, mind cannot be put in the category of an absolute perceiver. He is not nirapekshika, he is apekshika only. Then we come to the distinction. Then what is the difference between a relative perceiver and absolute perceiver? Relative knower, absolute knower. Relative experiencer, absolute experiencer. Relative seer and absolute seer. These are the 3 differences we come to. The first one, say, is the relative perceiver will be changing. Absolute perceiver cannot be changing. So relative perceiver goes on changing. Absolute perceiver doesn't change. Point number 1. Number 2. Savikara, Nirvikara. That is the first point. I am just using the same words used by those people so that you can give some acknowledgement to those, to their research, their work also. Second one is the relative perceiver is Paraprakasha, whereas absolute perceiver is Swayam Prakasha. Axiomatic, self-evident. It is self-evident. The objects need light, but the light don't need the objects to illumine. That takes us to the third point of The relative perceiver is dependent on a medium to function. It needs a medium to function. Whereas absolute perceiver doesn't require a medium to be function. It is independent of all the medium. For example, the eye to function, to see the color and form, the way in which the eye sees the color and form is dependent on the light. Isn't it? It's dependent on the light, no. If the light were to be hitting that object in a particular angle, the object will appear in one color. Isn't it? All of you have seen me, no? Few minutes back. How did I appear? Don't say, that was better, sir. Isn't it? The operations of the dependent perceiver, relative perceiver, is dependent on a medium. Whereas the absolute perceiver is the consciousness itself is sufficient in itself to do whatever it is to do. Then immediately we ask this question, so does that pure consciousness has some specifications? Like the mind has some choices, no? Of all the information that comes, the mind chooses to concentrate on particular, isn't it? Like that, does it have? That is where they say no. The pure consciousness is standing there as a sakshi. See, the pure consciousness is just a sakshi there. That's about it. He is not going to be doing anything. That's why we call it as I, the sakshi. Sakshi means, it's derived from the word iksha. Iksha means to see. Swayam ikshate iti sakshi. The one who sees by himself. See, a non-participatory observer. That is called a sakshi. Even the law also, no, you say, he is a witnesser. Who is a witness? Witness means the one who is uninvolved observer. It's called a witness. The pure consciousness stands and witnesses the things. There is no active participation from him. Whereas the mind, when it registers, there is an active participation. Right? Whereas the pure consciousness doesn't go through any active participation, but it registers everything. The I, which is the dependent, it is going to be working, needs the I to register, it needs the medium. Same way, the mind is also dependent on the I to register, isn't it? It is not only the I is dependent on light, the mind is also dependent on the I to register a sight. Suppose for whatever reason my eye were to get a cataract, then can the mind see? Suddenly one fellow met with an accident and he started hearing the radio channels along. Actual case. In 1 week the fellow died. Because he is hearing that, radio 24/7. You will go mad. You can't live, Imagine 24/7 going on and you cannot stop it. It's not like, a radio where you can switch off. You can't switch off because he is hearing. He met with an accident and, started hearing this radio news. Imagine, you are listening to news channel 24/7. Even the news anchor will go mad. It's not possible. Why, sir? It depends on the organ. The eye is dependent on the light, etc. Same way, the mind is dependent on the senses to register the things. He is also dependent. Then we ask this question, sir, what about the pure consciousness? Absolute perceiver. Is absolute perceiver dependent on anything? He says no. He is not dependent on anything. Why he is not dependent on anything? Because he is not actively participating. But however, all this you need to know for you to understand Vedantic theory of perception. Okay. To understand idealism and realism, and also to understand the objections you have. Now, when we are going to these two, we will be doing it in 3 steps. First, we will understand what is idealism, what is realism. Number 1. Step 2, we see is, we are supposed to, I don't know how I am going to go about, but that is how we are supposed to study. Right? Even if I am not explaining like that, you don't worry about it. Step 2 has to be, what is the objection, what is the fallacy or what is wrong in idealism according to realism. Step 3, what is Vedantic objection to idealism? Same way, what is realism? What is the objection raised by the idealists to realism? And what is the Vedantic objection to that? When you go to this Vedantic objections to a realist, also to an idealist, that objection will be based on all these factors. Right? So when we go there, you should not get confused. That's why I'm explaining now itself. So what we have seen is only this much today. Right? I thought we can start idealism today. It doesn't look like. I don't think we can start. Right? Just to recap. Right? What is subject? What is object? What subject, object? We found subject is a perceiver, object is perceived. Forms, color and form, etc. Object. Organs of perception, subject. Organs of perception, object. Mind, subject. Then mind, object. The pure consciousness, I, subject. Now here, the organs, the objects, the forms, etc., perennially standing as object. The pure consciousness perennially stands as subject. It never becomes an object. Why? Because it is independent and it is self-evident. Therefore, exactly like example. Now we can give examples. You need light to illumine the object. But to see the light, you don't require another light, no? Atmabodha, Shankara gives a beautiful example. He says, you need light to light all that, but to see the light, do you need another light? Why? Because the light is self-effulgent. Similarly, the pure consciousness is self-effulgent. These two done. Then he said, okay, now what about the organs of perception and mind? They play dual role. Organs of perception plays a dual role. Then we saw what is the nature of subject and what is the nature of object. Why you need that? Based on that only you can classify them. On what basis we are classifying, sir? On the basis of the features. What are the features of object? What are the features of sub-object? Apply those things to them. Based on that we do it. There we found these two. Therefore we have two things now. There is perennially subject, perennial object one side. Other side, variable subject object this side. Now what are we to analyze now? Where are we to pay our attention? He said, pay attention in the areas of perception, the perceiver. Why? Because our agenda is to know who is the real perceiver. Is the basic agenda. Therefore, discuss with reference to studying who is the perceiver. The perceiver is classified into two categories then. One is a relative perceiver, another one is an absolute perceiver. Then who is a relative perceiver? What is his nature? And who is the absolute perceiver? What is his nature? This is all we have seen. Right. Now you can say, sir, we have covered two books. At least, 1.25 book we can say. In one class we have covered 1.25 book. Vedanta Paribhasha we have covered. The entire analysis and all that he is giving, of course not so much of detail, but I am just saying casually. Right? Pratyaksha Pramana. He is analyzing all this in the Pratyaksha Pramana. Also in this Drigdrishya Viveka. These two books we have covered. Right? All the Pramanas he is analyzing there in the Vedanta Paribhasha. What all he is doing is this. This is the basic analysis. Of course, after that they go directly to Vedantic theory of perception. Because they don't come into this idealism, realism law. Because to them these two are is not really interested in paying much attention to it. Because it's too ordinary for these people. For them. So here they move directly there in those books. In Vedanta Paribhasha, he does a little, objection to Vedantic theory of perception, and then he gives a justification to it, explanation to it. So when we go to Vedantic theory of perception, what we have to do? Again, we have to study the same thing. But we will not study from objection from idealists to Vedantic theory of perception, objection from realists to Vedantic theory of perception. Because they are not in the game itself. Right? They are already not qualified. They ask objection directly to Vedantic theory of perception. If possible, we will see all that. I don't know. If we can do it, that is how you have to study. If you say that I am going to study this theory of perception, Sarna, the steps to study is like this: 3 and 3. What is the 3? Idealism, realism, Vedantic theory. Then what is it? What is he saying? What is he saying? What is he saying? Then objection to idealism from realism. Then objections from Vedanta to idealism. Same way when you go to realism, what is realism? What is objection raised by idealist to realism? Then what is Vedantic objection to realism? Then when you come to Vedantic theory of perception, what is Vedantic theory of perception saying? But we don't come directly to what is objection raised by the idealist, what is objection raised by the realist. We don't go. We straight away ask questions to clarify what they are saying, objection to that, or further explanation needing for that, then resolve it. Objections and resolutions for it. Where your objections is not valid. So the way they study is like that. Tika will be like that. He's doing, Sutra, Bhashya, Atmapada, that's what he does. Yes. He raises objection, he doesn't give explanation to the objection. He says, your objection is invalid. So I'm not sure to what extent we can go to that much of detail, but it will be interesting to study that. It will be, that's where you actually understand the depth of the field, inquiry of all these people. He's just touching and going. Touch and go. And then he gives room for us to work on your own also. So that's why this class will help you to understand better, right? So if you have any confusions here, remember, discount the class and go back to the text. What is given in the text is more authentic than what is explained in the class. So if you feel that, sir, the class is looking, very confusing, forget it. You are not at loss at all. But if you miss the text here, what he is saying, right? So go through the text again, and if possible, now that we have this option of listening to the class, I don't know when they are going to post it, whenever they post. If you get a chance, listen to it. Right? See you in the next class.